Hey everyone, Holly here. In this pop-up, I wanted to share with you a bit about one of my favorite historical artists, and that is Hannelore Baron. She was a German-born artist who lived from 1926 to 1987. She was known for her collage and assemblage art, and in this pop-up, I want to create a collage piece inspired by her work. You can see that I've pulled out some of my materials here, but before I get started on my piece, I want to share some of Hannelore Baron's art with you and talk about her visual language and her process. I encourage you to do a Google search for her art on Pinterest as well to get a look at her works. Also, the website hannelore.net is a great place to learn more about her and her art. Right now we're going to take a look at the National Gallery of Art website. That particular website is one that has open access to images of art that are in the public domain. So basically that just means the photographs of the art are not under copyright, and so I'm okay to share those in this lesson. So let's take a look. So let's take a look at this first piece. This piece was created by Hannelore in 1984. And over here on the side, it tells us the medium that she used, which for this one was wood, string, fabric, and paper. Hannelore used materials that were worn and torn and fragile, and she often incorporated found objects into her art. Versus using new materials, these aged and found objects gave her art a feeling of history and depth. And we also have the dimensions of her piece. She typically made smaller pieces. A lot of her pieces were around the size of a book, and these smaller pieces gave her art a more detailed and intimate feeling that you sometimes can't get with larger art. And it's been said that viewers of Hannelore's art felt as if they were viewing a private diary. She used symbols that looked quite like letters, but they were indecipherable, and that gave her art a feeling that there was a hidden message. Let's take a look at another one. This piece she created in 1986. She used watercolor, printing ink, pen and ink, graphite, and collage on wove paper. Again, we've got the letter-like symbols that feel like they give a message, feel like we should be able to read it, but yet they're indecipherable. Hannelore's art was a way for her to explore themes of trauma and loss and survival, as she had difficult challenges throughout her life. Her formative years were during World War II, and then in 1941, she and her family fled Nazi persecution and relocated to the United States. So definitely those experiences influenced her personal life and her artistic expression. Let's take a look at another one. This piece was in 1986. She used gouache, printing ink, pen and ink, and collage on lightweight paper. So I'm really drawn to her use of materials, and it gives her art an aged look, a very raw and personal aesthetic. I love her muted color palettes, and her pieces feel very textured to me, or it looks like they would be very textured, looks like they would provide a very tactile experience. I love her scribbly line work and her personal alphabet, or the sort of, Semitic writing that she used frequently in her pieces. And I'm noticing that she used a lot of squares in her artwork. Squares or rectangles, and that gave it more of a solid geometric feel. So she didn't necessarily use flowy shapes, but these rectangles and squares. And I want to go back to the first one, this one. I've also noticed in viewing her artwork that she incorporated a lot of wood and dark wood into her art. She used it as either, a frame or as actual collage pieces. Okay, let's take a look at one more. This was in 1985, collage of paper and printed fabric on fabric with transparent and opaque watercolor and graphite. So she's definitely a mixed media artist using a range of materials. This one, not as much mark making on it, a more minimal piece. Again, the muted color palette. She's got some orange and pink in there, but it's very muted. Looks like she used some graphite. And of course she did, because we just mentioned that she used graphite in this piece. And her pieces feel so personal, so raw, and I do agree with the idea that it feels like there's hidden messages, feels like you're looking at someone's intimate diary. Okay, and then the last few pieces on this particular website are ones where she has done monoprints. But anyway, I hope that gives you an idea of how Hannelores art looks, and I encourage you to search for more of her art that you can view online and to learn more about her life and her artistic process. So now that we've had a look at Hannelore's art and we've talked about the type of materials that she used, let me show you what I've pulled. I went through my stash and gathered papers that I felt had more of a worn appearance, a largely muted color palette, also papers that had more of a textured appearance. So things like this vintage Braille paper, of course, is very textured, and I've already added my own mark making, and so it already has that sort of worn and personal feel to it. This is a type of craft paper that I did the momogami technique on and had added paint to at a later point. So again, it's more of a worn, fragile piece, and it almost has a fabric type feel to it. This particular paper came out of some sort of journal that I bought, and it was probably like a handmade type of paper that already had a fabric-like feel to it. And I, at some point, had stained it with a homemade dye that I made. Tea bag paper. I pulled out some book spines, vintage book spines, pieces of vintage book cover. This was a piece that I found in a parking lot one day, and I just picked it up and put it in my stash. It's probably like a leather type strap off of a purse. So just like Hannelore Incorporated found materials, I like to pick up interesting things that I find and put them in my stash. This is a piece of craft paper that I've painted and added stitching to, so either side could be used on that. Got some vintage book paper that I have at some point rust stained and added my own marks to. So I've just gathered a variety of papers. And the other thing is I've tried to gather squares and rectangles because I noticed that Hannelore used that often in her art. So I've gathered all these, and I'm not going to use them all, but I just wanted to gather a few that I felt like in the moment sort of reminded me of Hannelore's materials so that they could be inspiration pieces for this collage that I'm putting together. Another thing I want to show you is that I have this board. It is 6 inches by 12 inches, and I stained it with this FW acrylic artist ink in sepia. And I may be jumping ahead of myself because the reason I knew to use this size is because off camera I spent some time playing with these papers to determine what composition I would like to use. Because this is meant to be a quicker pop-up lesson, I didn't want you to have to, spend so much time watching me sort of playing around with the papers and arranging them in different ways. So I have come up with sort of a base composition that I like. Let me show you that. So that's how I knew that I needed this size, because I put together, again, I was playing with this off camera, and this took a while to come up with. I didn't just, do this in a matter of seconds or anything. And I tried out different papers to see what I would like. Let's see, I think this goes like that. And sort of like that. And I liked this vintage book cover. I had tried out between these two. I like this one because at some point I accidentally got some black ink on there, but I like the little bit of black. So something like that. And then again, trying to continue with rectangular pieces or square pieces. I liked something like that. These little, that's a vintage book spine. These are pieces of a vintage book cover. This side is just green, but this side got some white paint on it. I think I'd used this in a collage before, and I'd put it down on wet paint, ended up not liking it, pulled it off, but now I like this side that has got the white paint on it. So sometimes happy accidents like that happen. And then let's see, I had a square piece in here that I really liked. This little piece I liked right here. And I'll have to, all these pieces are kind of crinkly and wrinkly, so I'll have to glue them down better, glue them down flat. And then at this point, I sort of had a few little small pieces that I tried out a variety and couldn't decide what I liked. So maybe something like that, or just that piece, or this piece. So anyway, this is what I am sure of. And what I want to do is, because Hannelore used a lot of that symbolic, or the symbols that looked like writing, but they were indecipherable, I want to add some of that into my piece. So some line work or some sort of acymic writing. So I want to put that down here. And I'm going to go ahead and do that first. And then I'm going to glue these pieces down because those are steps that I know I want to take. And then these little details that I'm unsure about, I'll save those to the end and see how everything looks once it's glued down, because that sort of changes the appearance. And then once I've got marks on here, because that's going to change the appearance of this as well. And then I'll come in with the things that I'm unsure about right now, and hopefully I'll have better clarity on that at that point. So before I start gluing stuff down, I now want to add the acymic style writing or the letter-like symbols. And let me show you. I've already played around with that on some other of the same type of paper. So I played around using different materials. And at first I tried the white oil pastel or the white art crayon, and I like it okay, but I felt like the white was a bit maybe cold, I guess, compared to this color palette, or it was too much white, and I felt like this was more of a sort of grungier looking color palette. So I then used this sort of pink color oil pastel, and I liked that a lot better. And I still ended up adding a little bit of white because I noticed I had some white up here at the top, and then of course the white that I talked about on this. So I thought I might like another little bit of white, but this just seemed like too much. So I am going to take this piece. This is the piece that I want the symbolic like writing on. And I'm going to use my pink oil pastel. And I'm just going to try to do some symbols that feel like letters, you know, inspired by Hannelore's, the type of writing that she did on her pieces, that feels like there should be a message there, but the message is hidden because we can't read. We can't actually read the symbols, although it looks like writing. So I'm going to hold my oil pastel lightly, and I'm just going to start at the top because I'm going to do this on the entirety of the paper. I'm trying to be very loose about it and just hold the oil pastel loosely at the end, and also just sort of let it twirl around as I make marks. Let some marks run off of the page. I want to make sure that I'm varying the size of marks too. If you're having trouble making or coming up with some marks, you could just make letters backwards, or like letters upside down. So something like that. And just like on this one, how I did a little bit of white. I think I want to come in and do that again. Something like that. And I can even scrape away at it so it's not so perfect. I also liked this particular art crayon. This was the color that I had used at the top of here for these circles. So I think I want to put a few marks using this color. Just like that. Okay, I'm going to move some of this out of the way so I can start to glue these larger pieces down on my board. Okay, for my glue, I'm going to be using either this nori paste or this glue stick. So any kind of glue that you like to use is fine. I've got a paintbrush to apply my glue. And because, again, I had already laid out a composition that I wanted to use, I know what piece I need to lay down first. So it's this big piece I want to get down or glue down first. And you can see that some of the wood is going to show on the side on a couple of these pieces, and that's fine. I think I actually like that. Okay, so I'm going to start applying glue to this, and I'm going to use nori paste for this one. So typically the larger, thicker papers, I want to use a sturdier glue like this nori paste, and then some of my smaller papers or my thinner papers, I'm just going to take the easy route of using the glue stick. So I'm trying to get all the corners covered, but I'm also not really worried about it if it has any edges that are sticking up, just because I feel like that adds to the aesthetic that I'm going for, the sort of worn aesthetic, the imperfect look. So I don't need things to lay down perfectly flat. And I've got a damp paper towel that I'm going to use just to clean up any glue that might have squeezed out onto the wood, because I don't want it to dry on the wood, because then that creates a different sheen in that one little area. So I want to clean up or tidy it up where I need to. Okay, and then I know that this piece goes on next. So for this, because it has holes in it, I don't really want the nori paste, that sort of glue, to squeeze through it. So I'm going to use the glue stick for this one. And this is a thicker paper, but I think the glue stick should hold it on well enough. Okay, and again, I'm just gonna kind of pat at the wood to remove any glue that may have squeezed out onto that. I know my next piece is this one. And I just want to make sure before I glue it down that that's where I want to put it. It's just lining it up right with the edge of that one. And it's going to be covered with this piece. But I just want to make sure, see if I want it further down like that. So I'm just trying to take a look at these details before I commit to gluing it down. So I think like that. So just right up against there. And what I like to do is take pictures. So I'll try out a few different compositions, or where I want things lined up when I glue them down. I'll take pictures of a few different options. So then I can look at those pictures, and that helps, kind of gives me a different perspective and helps me to make decisions about things like that. Okay, and again, this is very textured paper, so I'm not worried about it being glued completely flat. Like I said, I think it will add to the look if it's more imperfect. Okay, I'm going to go for this piece next, and I need to cut a bit of it off. And then I'll save this little bit that may be used in a piece later. Okay, and I know that I like this up a bit so that it's sort of covering a part of this oval. I just kind of like the look of that being a little bit, or the edge of it being a little bit hidden beneath there. This is a thicker piece, a heavier piece. I'm going to use the nori paste on it as well. But if you have something like a gel medium, that would work well for heavier pieces. PVA glue, like an Elmer's glue, usually works fine too. And I'm going to clean up any glue that may have squeezed out on the edges. I'm also trying to hold my piece up, because when you are gluing stuff flat, sometimes you hold it up and you've actually glued something down crooked. So you want to look at, before your glue dries, while you can still move pieces around, you want to look at it from different angles. So lying flat and then straight up like you would have it on a wall, to make sure that you're gluing things the right way. Okay, this piece is going to go here. Okay, and I liked this piece, I think, like a little bit under there. Maybe about there. So for this one, it's pretty lightweight. I'm just going to use the glue stick. And this has not dried, so I can lift that up. Okay, this little piece was next. I think I just like it there. I think I might try the glue stick on this. This is just a piece of sort of like the fabric type cover on a vintage book. It's lightweight, so I think the glue stick should hold it fine. Okay, so those are the main pieces that I wanted on there. And then I had a few small pieces that I wasn't sure about that I'm just going to go through and try out on here. And I like that. I keep coming back to this little one. So I think now that I've got all this on here, I either like it just as it is, or maybe with this little piece added. And this little piece has some threading on it, so that could give it a little bit of extra texture. Okay, so I think I'm gonna put that on there, and I'll just put it down with some nori paste. Okay, so I've been trying to add some of this gray oil pastel to sort of push back that white because I just really didn't like the white there. And it's sort of torn the paper a bit because this paper is so fragile and it's a little bit wet right now from the glue. So I'm going to stop working on it there and maybe I'll sort of tidy it up later. But it's pretty much finished and I'm happy with how this piece turned out. I really enjoyed using Hannelore Baron's work as an inspiration for this piece and I hope that shines through. And I also hope it has some of my own personal look as well, as this isn't meant to be a copy of anything she did, but rather a way to explore some of the ways in which she created. So I hope you enjoyed this pop-up and learned something new, something that you can take into your own process. Thanks for watching.